Welcome back to Hoa Karen Stories. Everyone, in today's wild story, we have a classic Karen who tried to ruin a peaceful family moment, calling the police over my kids' inappropriate swimwear and loud music at our pool party. It doesn't stop there, though. She escalated things with anonymous letters and even tried to get rid of my pool entirely. But don't worry, this time, I decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. Trust me. You won't want to miss how this all went down. Stay tuned for the full story. As a single father, I was doing my best to raise my two kids, Andrew, 8, and Loris, 10. After their mother passed away a few years ago, life had been hard, and we bounced from my in-laws' house to my parents' place until I finally found a steady job in a city not too far from either of them. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start, and after months of searching, we settled into a new home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The neighborhood was friendly, the neighbors were warm, and I quickly became friends with a few other parents, organizing playdates for the kids. One neighbor, though, stood out. Mr. Eastwood, or Mr. East as we called him, had recently moved in with his wife. They were in their 60s and seemed nice enough at first. We didn't interact much, but I knew he was retired and had a peculiar habit of leaving anonymous notes whenever he thought someone had broken a rule. The first time he did it, I had parked my car in front of his house since there was no space in front of mine. He left a note saying it was illegal and that I should park properly. I apologized and thought nothing of it. But it became clear over time that Mr. East had an issue with pretty much everyone. His notes were a regular nuisance, and I began to feel like we were in the crosshairs of his criticism. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the chaos that would unfold. It wasn't long before I met the real troublemaker in the neighborhood, Karen. She was the president of the Hoa, and while I thought she'd be a helpful community leader, I quickly learned how wrong I was. One scorching summer afternoon, my kids, Andrew and Loris, were having a blast in the pool. We lived in a desert area, so the heat was unbearable, and the pool was their favorite place to cool off. We were also having a small gathering with a few other kids over for a playdate. The backyard was filled with laughter, a few inflatable pool toys floating around, and the sounds of cheerful music blasting from the speakers. But apparently, that wasn't okay with Karen. From across the street, she could hear the music and, despite the fact that the volume was perfectly reasonable, she didn't like the energy in our backyard. The next thing I knew, the police were knocking on my door. I answered the door to see two officers standing there, looking serious. "Sir, we received a complaint about public indecency at your residence," one of the officers explained, their tone flat and professional. I blinked in confusion. "Public indecency? At my house? What do you mean?" The officer pointed across the street. "Your neighbor, Karen, called us. She claims the children are wearing inappropriate swimwear, and the music is too loud." My heart sank. Karen? What was she talking about? My kids were dressed in appropriate swimsuits, and the music was far from loud. But before I could voice my concerns, the officers followed me to the backyard, where my children were swimming in the pool. "Kids, don't be scared," I told them, trying to keep the situation light. The officers observed for a moment. After scanning the area, one officer turned to me and shook his head. "There's nothing inappropriate here. The swimwear is perfectly fine. The volume is acceptable too. We can't hear it from the front of the house." I sighed in relief, though the frustration was starting to build. The officer then said, "We'll go have a word with Karen." I nodded, wondering what could possibly make someone so petty. I hadn't expected to be dealing with this at all. The officers walked into the backyard with me, their steps echoing slightly on the stone pathway. I could tell they were trying to be professional, but their body language told a different story. They were clearly skeptical about the complaint. I led them to the pool area where my kids were splashing around, completely oblivious to the reason the police had arrived. The sun was beginning to dip. casting a golden glow over the scene. The music played softly in the background, just loud enough to set the mood without disturbing anyone else. "All right, officers. Here's the situation," I started, gesturing to my kids. "My kids are dressed in appropriate swimwear, and the music is at a reasonable volume. I don't know what the problem is, but clearly, someone is making a fuss." One of the officers, a tall man with short cropped hair, nodded as he scanned the area. "We just need to verify everything and make sure there's no issue," he said. His tone was neutral, but I could hear the underlying frustration. They were doing their job, but it was clear they didn't believe Karen's accusations. The other officer, a woman with a calm demeanor, observed the kids in the pool. "I'm not seeing any issues here. They're dressed appropriately for the pool. And the music. I can barely hear it from here," she said, her voice calm but firm. I watched them as they moved around the yard, their eyes darting from the kids to the music speakers, then back to the pool. It was obvious there was nothing to find. The kids were just being kids, enjoying a summer day. And the music was no louder than a neighbor's conversation. The male officer turned back to me with a sigh, looking slightly exasperated. "Everything seems fine. There's no reason for us to be here." Relief washed over me. But the annoyance wasn't far behind. I couldn't believe that Karen had gone so far with this ridiculous complaint. The officer turned to leave, but not before offering a final word. "We'll speak to Karen," he said. "She needs to understand that making calls like this wastes everyone's time. If she does this again, there will be consequences." I nodded, grateful that they weren't taking her side. As the officers left, I felt a mix of satisfaction and anger bubbling up inside. The whole situation had been absurd, and I was just thankful the police saw through Karen's nonsense. But I knew this wouldn't be the last time I'd have to deal with her. A few days after the police visit, things settled back into a familiar rhythm. My kids were back to their normal routines, swimming in the pool, enjoying their summer break. I tried not to dwell too much on Karen's bizarre complaint. After all, the police had already cleared everything up, and life had returned to normal. Right? Well, not exactly. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast for the kids, I noticed something strange. An envelope slipped under my front door. It was thick, official looking, but with no return address. I opened it, and immediately, my frustration began to rise. It was another anonymous letter from Karen. This time, she was complaining about everything from the toys scattered in the yard to the way I was raising my children. She criticized the way I allowed my kids to play outside, stating that their unruly behavior was disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. "Your children's constant noise and mess are a nuisance," the letter read, "and the toys all over your yard are an eyesore. It's time for you to take responsibility for raising your kids properly." I couldn't believe it. This woman had the audacity to judge my parenting when she didn't even know me or my children. The letter ended with a thinly veiled threat: "If you don't correct this behavior, we will have to escalate the matter to the Hoa." I crumpled the letter in my hand, but the anger inside me only grew. Karen wasn't stopping at just one complaint. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time criticizing the color of my house. "The garish color of your home is completely out of place in this neighborhood. It's a distraction and lowers the value of the properties around you," it read. I could feel my patience wearing thin. How petty could someone be? But the worst part was yet to come. A week later, I heard from a few neighbors that Karen had posted a petition on our neighborhood's online forum, calling for the removal of my pool. She claimed it was a safety hazard, an eyesore, and that it was too loud for the surrounding homes. Of course, the petition was only signed by Karen herself. Not a single other neighbor supported it. Still, I couldn't help but be taken aback by her relentless attempts to make my life difficult. It was clear now, Karen wasn't going to let this go. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this nonsense either. I had to figure out how to handle her before this spiral of complaints got out of hand. The problem was that Karen wasn't just causing problems for me, she was now actively trying to poison the well for my whole family. Enough was enough. Karen's persistent complaints, her anonymous letters, and now her online petition had gone too far. I had tried to ignore her at first, but the situation was escalating. My kids deserved to enjoy their summer without fear of constant judgment. And I wasn't going to let Karen's petty vendettas ruin our peace. So, I decided to take a different approach, one that would make her feel the sting of her own behavior. I wasn't going to play by her rules anymore. Instead of confronting her directly again, I chose to fight fire with fire. I created a website under the name Neighborhood Watch Group. It was easy to set up, thanks to platforms like Google Sites. I could do it quickly and without much hassle. I made myself the captain of this new group and put up a few general rules that, on the surface, seemed like harmless guidelines for maintaining neighborhood order. But here's where it got interesting. I had a few friends in the neighborhood who were on my side, and they agreed to play along. They helped me spread the word about this new neighborhood watch. And before long, the website seemed official enough to intimidate Karen. I even had a friend who specialized in props make me a fake badge, just to add a touch of realism. With this new persona, I started sending Karen fake warnings. These warnings were about the smallest, most ridiculous things. You left your trash cans out too long. Your lawn is not properly trimmed. Or your car is parked too far from the curb. It was petty. But after everything Karen had put me through, I wasn't going to hold back. I made sure the warnings were all in person, delivered with a calm demeanor, making them look more official than they were. I uploaded pictures of her infractions to the website for added effect. The first few times I showed up at her door with these warnings, I could tell Karen was getting anxious. She would open the door, eyes wide. As I flashed my badge and handed her the warnings, I could almost see her blood pressure rising each time. She started asking questions, but I kept my answers short, never letting on that it was all a ruse. The more I visited her, the more uneasy she seemed. The power dynamic was shifting. I was finally in control. Eventually, Karen reached out to a few neighbors, asking if they had seen this new neighborhood watch group and if they thought it was legitimate. But no one took her seriously. A few weeks later, her anonymous letters stopped arriving, and her online petition was quietly erased from the neighborhood forum. It seemed like she'd finally gotten the message. One afternoon, I hosted a small pool party to celebrate the peace finally settling in. My neighbors, the ones who had been helping me, came over to enjoy the day. We swam, laughed, and let our kids play without a care in the world. From across the street, I could see Karen sitting on her porch, staring at us with a scowl. But she didn't move. No more complaints. No more drama. Just silence. I realized then that sometimes, in order to stand up to someone like Karen, you have to meet their petty tactics with your own. And sometimes, you need to become the Karen in order to deal with the real one. After all, the only way to stop someone from ruining your life is to turn the tables and show them that you're not afraid to fight back.